Hi guys, my name's Ali. Welcome back to Techstar Plans. Today we're going to be doing a client red tech video, which got me top 4 at the Stockport PQ at the weekend. If you enjoy this type of content, please like, comment, subscribe, and join our Discord below. Hope you enjoy the video. Hi guys, welcome back to Techstar Plans. My name's Ali, and today we'll be going over a brief video and deck tech of the deck that I took at the weekend, which was client red. For a few requests for this deck, so I thought it was worth just going over some of the choices we made, how the event went, and some of the sort of good and bad matches for the client and whether or not I would take it to an event in the future. So the client red is an aggressive red-yellow villain deck that aims to finish the game by 5 or 6 resources. The client's effect, when you read them, doesn't look that relevant. He has an effect when you exhaust him, you can exhaust an enemy unit if they've made a token this phase, and when he's out he comes deploys on 5, and effect is when you attack you may exhaust the unit if you've made a token this phase. He deploys as a 4/4 shielded, so because he deploys with a shield you've made a token this phase. So the sort of aim of the game is to put a bit of early damage on the board, leading into a really strong client flip where you can kind of suit him up with a couple of upgrades and then finish the game super early. Because he's got a shield, he's quite hard to out, so it means that you can have a pretty linear game plan of putting a bit of damage on the base and pretty reliably not have to worry about your client being outed. This might change going forward, but just the pool of cards that there are still means that there'll be countless games where you can just upgrade this leader and they'll have no answer for it. So going through the cards as they are, I think it's important we start with the 2-drops. So as I said, one of the most important things is to put early damage on base. So we try to put some aggressive 2-drops in, and these include, 1 minute, that mat's fallen down, if you can see. Yeah, so, sorry, the mat's back up. So the 2-drops that you want to include are the ones that can put damage on base early, so Aura Sing and Warrior are going to put a lot of early damage on. The other cards are sort of utility cards, so BT1 is going to activate your triple for later. The Black Sun comes in with a shield and is in space, so can dodge those ground matchups, and the token unit can, the token that the shield that the unit comes in with can help enable the client's effect earlier. The Interrogation Droid is an important for flip turn to help you win that race because you can exhaust one of their units. And finally, the Garindin is just a kind of utility card that you can play to sort of call the sort of meta calls in some matchups. Really good into Lando, and if you expect that they're holding upgrades. Going on to the 3-drops, we play Triple O, Arvo, Shinhati, Stolen Hauler, all 4 attack units. Triple O sometimes has 5 attack, basically. They all have their own sort of benefit. Obviously Arvo is really good into some matches. Shinhati is really good as she comes in shielded and hidden, so can steal the game late in the game. Can steal the game late because she's hidden, and the token can activate the client's effect sometimes. Triple O, as I said, can do 5 damage, and a stolen ATR can dodge that ground arena. So depends on the matchup, depends what one you want to play. But a lot of the time, you aren't mulling again for the 3-drop. You're more mulling again for the next cards we're going to talk about, which are the upgrades. So the upgrades are one of the most important part of this deck. So as I said, it sort of suit up the client and go base for flip. So the most important way to do this is probably Sudden Ferocity, because Sudden Ferocity can be plotted out and it means you don't need to keep it in hand for later. It means you can play more to curve more reliably. Probably the next best is Battle Fury. This card +3/+3 to the client for only 2 makes your client really hard to kill even if they get rid of the shield, and then that leads on to the other 2, which is Sentry Cable and Darth Maul's Lightsaber. Sentry Cable is good for giving it a health buff, and Saboteur, which is good, important for some matchups, and then Maul's Lightsaber is sort of just like another copy of Battle's Fury. We play some pumps for the end game, so that would be Aggressive Negotiations, the Commence Festivities. You almost always stop resourcing on 5, so Commence Festivities means that your client always gets a bit of a buff. In Aggressive Negotiations, because you stop resourcing on 5, it kind of almost gives it +2 most of the time. Sometimes you can give it massive boosts if you don't have the Battle Fury on, and you've got something else on. Finally, some of the other cards to fill out the curve we play is Hold for Questioning. Alea Kane, and Charge for Treason, and Stygian Prime. So on 4th resources, there's not a lot of cards that are that broken to play. I'd say Stygian's probably the best one, just because it means that if they've got upgrade removal, they're going to have to use it on the unit that you've Stygianed, and it can be really good into sort of matchups where they rely on pilots and they've only got one ship left. So if you Stygian their only ship, then they can't really deploy, and then you can keep controlling that arena on top of putting damage on base. Alea Kane was a sort of last minute inclusion. Yeah, I think probably overperformed and should maybe go up just because that 4th resource turn doesn't have a lot of cards you can play on that turn. So it's kind of like a 3/6 but really a 4/6. It's quite hard to kill, and has the effect that it can blow up one of the resources if it's that type of matchup. So if you're playing against something like Boba or Luke, you can hit a Topple or Cinta, and it's quite reliable because you play it on 4 and they've only got 4 resources, so you've got a kind of 75% chance of hitting one if they have it. Charge of the Treason is a bit of extra removal for the Stolen Hauler and kind of ground sentinels with 5 health, like a Typho. I think this card is kind of a space filler, and I think there's probably room for improvement in this slot, as well as Hold for Questioning. I feel like Hold for Questioning into Grindin's pretty good. Hold for Question exhausts unit, and then you get to look at the hand and discard a card with the same aspect. It can be quite interactive, but it doesn't really fit into the game plan of the client as much, and I feel like the matchups that it benefits into, such as Lando, I think the client has a pretty good matchup anyway into them. I don't think it's very good into things like Boba or Luke, because there's not much you can really take out their hand, because they basically just play a spaceship anyway. So I think Hold for Question and Charge for Treason are probably cards that may be replaced in the future, and possibly even Grindin, but we'll have to look. In the sideboard, you want to target the meta, so we expected it to be some Boba and some Luke, so we sided the Lycanes, Electromagnetic Pulse, Shoot Bins for those matchups. Ascension Cable is and Commandeer. Ascension Cable is for Saboteur matchups, and Arvoskin is for sort of credit hate. Okay, so I think the client has some really favourable matchups, and it's difficult. The reason we took it was because we felt like it had a kind of unexpected factor and people wouldn't really know what to do against it, but ultimately none of that really came up, and because his effect is so, it's so weak that there's not really much surprise factor with it. So I don't think he's actually in a weaker place than he was, and because Boba is now taken off, he might actually be in a stronger place. I think that Boba really struggles into the client, and I think that's well represented in the matches that I played. We knew that Boba was a pretty free matchup for the client. The sort of lines you can take into it are, you ideally want to put some early damage on that they can't really control your ground arena early, so then when you flip the client, you just sit up and they can't really out 2 upgrades, they can usually out 1, so if you get an extra upgrade on, it can be pretty game ending for them. The exhaust comes up a little bit, so when the client deploys, you usually get the exhausted unit, and that can save a lot of damage off your base. So because the client can end up attacking for 7, 10 or 11 depending on what upgrades you have on them, despite them having 34 in their base, it's over pretty quick, and it's really hard for them to topple Boba effect through the shield if they don't have upgrade removal, and if they do have upgrade removal, it kind of ruins their curve in terms of not being able to play a punishment 1 on 5 and stuff like that. I see an important card in the Boba matchup, as we said, was Stygian Prime, because you can sort of Stygian one of the units on 4, and then they have to remove it, otherwise it kind of messes up their curve even further. Because what can happen is if you Stygian, they don't have the actions to sort of determine whether so they don't have an actions to wait for your flip. So if you Stygian them, you'll be attacking their base for probably 7 again with your turn 1 and turn 2 play. They've taken 2 from the Stygian. You can fake pass with the client or free pass, which means that you can exhaust the client even if you've not made a token this turn, and if they sort of pass, or if they play something that's not super relevant, like a kind of less than 5 cost unit, then you know that they're probably holding upgrade removal for the client, so you don't play into it as much, or you try to put 2 upgrades on the client. The other thing they have to do is just remove the Stygian Prime, with like a constable or a system shock or something, and if they do that, then it means your client's going to be able to attack for 7, 10 or 11 depending on what upgrades you have. So I think Boba is actually a really favourable matchup for the client. I think if you play the client well, it's almost impossible to lose that matchup, I'd say. They don't have the tools in our deck to beat the client. Again, some of the plays are not that easy to play, such as the early passing into a free pass into a deploy, because you need to know what's in their deck. So I think the caveat is that if you both play perfectly, I think that it's quite hard for the client to lose, but obviously there's options for them to steal the game off you if you don't play perfectly. I think the benefit of the client is that there's not that many decision trees to take, so if you put a few reps in, then you can begin to see some of the lines you can take. So I think going forward, the client will still be relevant because it has a pretty good matchup into Boba Fett. Another matchups that the client is pretty favourable, especially this list, is probably Lando, which I expected to see a bit more of over the weekend, but it's completely fallen off because of the bad Boba matchup, I think. The hand disruption that it currently runs can cripple Lando by taking out its curve, and the sort of early upgrades mean that if you attack on 5 for a lot of damage and then attack for 6 on a lot of damage, even for someone like a Bo-Katan doesn't really stop you because you can just claim and attack again. The shield's quite hard to get through, and they don't really have anything that can get through the client shield without the client becoming a meat grinder, which wins the game in itself. So I think Lando's pretty favoured. Tobias, Jin and Vel, I never actually got to play any at the weekend, but through our testing, again, if you play the client correctly, it becomes very hard to lose those matchups. The hardest probably being Beckett, depending on how they play, but the other ones, you can have complete control over the board via your client becoming a meat grinder again. So when I say a meat grinder, what it means is because it's so upgraded and it has a shield, they're going to have to throw all the units and all the resources into it, which then means that you're going to be playing these Aura Sings and Triple O's, and they've lost their full board. So because apart from Vel, because Tobias and Jin deploy on 5, your client deploys on 5, so it can hold them hostage, so they can't really upgrade their leaders, so they lose a lot of that early damage, and they need to become a bit of a control deck into your aggro deck, and the cards they have access to don't really suit that type of playstyle. They have some of the Sentinels, but because of Commencement Festivities and Ascension Cable, it becomes a little bit less relevant, and the client being able to attack through one of them while it's still upgraded, they still have that. If you have Battle Fury in the client, it's really still hard for them to answer something like a Battle Fury client even without the shields. So I think these matchups are pretty favourable. I think probably the hardest matchup for the client is Obi-Wan. Luckily, I think it's fallen out of favour a bit because of Boba being so prevalent and having quite a bad Boba matchup, but something to be aware of, that I think that it really struggles into Obi-Wan being able to produce so many Grand Sentinels and having a bit of restore. Especially the Virgin's Temple version, I think it does a bit better into the 28 base, which I think is probably the better deck into the meta just now, so it'll be interesting to see sort of how it does into the 28 base. We didn't have a lot of practice into that, but I still don't think it would be a good matchup for the client. And then sort of the blue villain decks, Talzin and Maul, the client can win those matchups, but you kind of need a lot of funky plays in space. So AT Hall is your best friend in that. If they steal the Hall off you, you need to try and get it back with Charge for Treason. Stygian Prime's pretty good in those matchups, but again, I think if you both play perfectly in those matchups, it's quite hard to win. The benefit, I think, at the time was that people didn't know what the client did, so I was pretty confident that I would win those matchups regardless. Going forward, I think that he's probably, as I said, in a good position. I think that you get rewarded by playing a lot of routes with him and seeing sort of some of the lines into different decks, and I think there is slightly different lines into different decks. I don't think he performed as well as I thought he would. For those of you that know me, like, I'm a pretty competitive player and go to events to win. So I think that the client didn't perform as well as I thought that he would in testing. Maybe that was variance on the day, but I think that it's quite a high risk strategy. So we'll need to see how that goes. Yeah, so that's where we're at with the client. If people have questions on sort of different lines, put in the comments below. I think if we're going to change anything about the deck, I'd probably increase. I really don't like the Charge of the Treason and the Garindans and the Hover Questions, so I think that we talked about Arrest a lot, and I'm not sure if our team at Cormac did play Arrests or not, but I think they kind of fill the same role most of the time, being able to steal your own hauler back, and then getting rid of Ground Sentinels. It kind of fits that same role, and getting rid of like an upgraded Chewie or something, or a piloted ship. So I think that Arrest probably fills the same role, but on the 2 cost kind of curve, and then I probably would upgrade up Darth Maul's lightsaber and Ascension cables, just because I feel like Hover Questioning doesn't really fit into the game plan of going quite aggressive, and I think that being able to play those cards, if you've got more of them, you can probably put them on units on the ground, despite just holding them for your leaders. And I think that holding it for your leader, and I think that having that option probably makes the client even more scary early on. So yeah, I think that's where I would go from here. I'm not sure if I would play it again at an event. I think that there's not a lot of answers for this deck, and I think that it's probably going to see an uptick in popularity because people like this type of style of play, so I wouldn't be surprised to see more of this deck. So as I said, if you've got any questions, leave a comment below. Someone will get back to you, and join our Discord in the link, and I might get back to you on the Discord. Thanks for watching, guys.